Bookending.
It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. So begins the Dickens book, A Tale of Two Cities. He was talking about the extremes of one time period. Bookending is looking at the potential extremes of a company's future. A company must be ready for any outcome in the range between those extremes.
In bookending analysis, you enter model input amounts that are higher and lower than the base case amount. It's also known as bracketing. It's sometimes thought of as creating a best case and worst case scenario. It can be done with each assumption one at a time for sensitivity testing. Many times, models are built with inputs for a high, low, and base case amount. For example, forecasted sales might be $1 million for a new product, but leaders want to see the profits at $100,000 in sales and $3 million in sales to see a broader range of risk and reward. In bookending, you don't usually pick the highest and lowest number possible or that you would ever expect. The low number is usually an amount for which you would predict that you would only see a number lower than that amount 10% of the time. And the high amount is also an amount for which you would predict to only see amounts higher than that 10% of the time. Another way to describe the high number is the amount for which 90% of the expected numbers are below it. A way to think about this is in terms of deciles. Imagine a set of data that's listed from the lowest number to the highest number. Deciles divide that set into 10 equal subsets of numbers. Imagine a data set of 1,000 numbers. Each decile contains 100 numbers, in other words, 1,000 divided by 10. The first decile starts at the lowest number and goes up to the 100th lowest number. The 100th lowest number is sometimes called P10 since there's a 10% probability that a randomly picked number is lower than it. In other words, 100 divided by 1,000 equals 10%. The middle number in the number series is called the median, also known as P50, because there's a 50% probability that a randomly picked number would be below it. The 90% probability number is called P90 because there's a 90% probability that a randomly picked number would be below it. To further explain deciles, here's an analysis from the United States Bureau of Labor and Statistics. It shows the first decile, median, and ninth decile amounts for weekly earnings by education level. Note that there is a good explanation of the median and deciles at the bottom of the graphs. The median is the middle value if all wages were listed from high to low. The average is much higher. There are CEOs whose wages seriously skew the average higher. There are many people making small amounts and a few people making very high amounts. This graph shows deciles for observed past data. The P10 and P90 values in bookending represent probabilities for future low and high values. Here is a simple table of low, base, and high values for bookending. This is for a hypothetical company that's thinking about opening a new retail store. They want to know the best and worst case values for key assumptions. The base case is their best estimate for the key assumptions, which is often the median or P50 value. Potential values are assumed to cluster around the median value. In other words, a large percentage of them are fairly close to the median. They think there's a 10% probability, P10, that sales will be $3 million or lower. Note that the difference between the base sales amount and the low sales amount is $2 million, but the difference between the high sales amount and base sales amount is only $1.5 million. I'll spend more time later explaining why those two differences don't need to be the same. Another key assumption is the gross margin. A third key assumption is operating costs. Here, we get into some semantic issues. For sales, low numbers are detrimental to profit. However, low operating costs are beneficial for profits. Be clear in reports about whether low means a low number for each assumption or a value that leads to a lower profit. If low means a low number for each assumption, you can't just use all the low numbers to create a stress scenario because some of those low numbers improve profit. Stress testing is a form of analysis of low or bad scenarios. It may be a very low probability scenario, which might be a use case for using a series of P10 assumptions to build a scenario. Even if you don't do that, it's still very important to think through the linkages between the assumptions in a crisis. Sometimes detrimental assumptions are correlated, so they happen together. Sometimes they aren't. Before the Great Recession, many banks thought they could borrow from other banks if they needed liquidity in a crisis. What we found was that sometimes things are so bad that no banks are able or willing to lend to each other. When I created the stress scenarios I mentioned in the first lesson, the scenarios went from mild to severe. In the severe scenarios, I projected major outflows of deposits, and at the same time, we had the least number of options for raising funding. Some small companies assume they can tap owner savings in a recession. They don't anticipate that the owners don't have much to contribute to the company when the stock market is also down 50% in the recession. Stress test scenarios aren't necessarily ones you use in the range of options considered during the strategic planning or budgeting. They should be considered occasionally to make sure the company has secure options for survival. One tip on stress testing is to do it for both profit and cash flow. Lack of profits is inconvenient, but lack of cash is quickly deadly. Break even analysis and the concept of margin of safety are related to bookending. In break even analysis, companies usually determine the sales volume that causes their profit to equal zero. For a long standing company with strong sales, that break even sales volume scenario may be similar to the low scenario or a stress test scenario. A scenario is truly stressful if your company is burning cash. Time is working against you because you have a limited amount of cash. The margin of safety is the difference between your expected performance and the break even amount. It's similar to the difference between the base case scenario and a low or stress scenario. It can be measured in units of revenue. It can also be expressed as a percentage or ratio of the expected performance. Check out my course on cost, volume, profit, and break even analysis if you want to learn more about this.